talk about your pain, can't appreciate the sun without acknowledging it rains, right? That's right. So this a moment of clarity, and make sure you always protect your energy. You stay focused and your life gon' be lit. And you are now rocking with Celeste, the therapist. Let's go.
Okay, unmute. Let me just make sure I'm on the mic. I am. Okay, cool. All right. Hi, beautiful people. If anybody's watching me on the replay, thank you so much for watching me. I appreciate you. My name is Celeste, and I'm a therapist from Boston. And my goal when I come on is to help you shift the way you think. And I've been able to do that by talking about these issues that we go through, and then kind of talking about ways that we can overcome it. And today's subject is we're talking about the body keeps the score and how trauma is held in your body. Last week, we talked about the importance of saying no. And that episode is out, it's streaming everywhere. You can find it on audio podcasting platforms, and you can also find it on my video components on Facebook and YouTube. So, when it comes to the body keeps the score, there's actually a book called The Body Keeps the Score. As somebody that's a practitioner, I enjoyed reading it because I enjoyed reading it because it talked a lot about the different ways that body shows up, trauma shows up in our body. And I also enjoyed it because it helps me with language, but it is a hard read. A better book, if anybody's curious about trauma, there's a book by Oprah Winfrey called What Happened to You. Her and a psychiatrist are having a conversation. And the book is called What Happened to You. A really good book where it's an easier read, where it gives different scenarios and stories around different things and how trauma has showed up in the body. This is a really important conversation because I recognize that a lot of times we don't realize how we store trauma and how we're affected by trauma. And so if you've never been into any of my videos, or you're listening to this in audio, on YouTube, you can find this episode where there's visuals. I'm a very visual learner, so it's easier for me to understand things if I have visual context behind it. Let me just add it to, I just want to add it so it shows what we're talking about on the banner really quick. The body keeps the score. The body keeps the score. All right, save, and I'm gonna let it scroll. Okay, cool. All right, so let's jump into this conversation that we're about to have. So, how does trauma affect the body physically? Because a lot of times when trauma happens, a lot of times people will say, as they're sharing their story with me, they'll say things like, oh, but this happened years ago, or this happened 15 years ago. And some of the behaviors that they're exhibiting, I can clearly see a direct correlation to what they've experienced and why it's creating so much turmoil in their life. But a lot of times people aren't able to experience it because they don't recognize that just because something happened 20, 30, 40 years ago doesn't mean that you're not affected by it because of how trauma ends up being stored. So that's what I want to help people understand. So how does trauma affect the body physically? So it says sometimes trauma can go beyond the psychological damage, right? Because we know about the psychological damage, and we're on our physical health, right? Trauma can change our cellular structure, our brain chemistry over time, which leads to illnesses, immune system deficiencies, and even some life-threatening diseases and shorter lifespan. And as we continue to talk, you'll understand how. But a lot of times, a lot of illnesses that people have is a direct correlation to the way that life was experienced for them. And as you can see, it says it can literally change your brain chemistry and your immune system. Some people with some weak immune systems, because your body's in the state all the time of like fight or flight. Like there may not be any danger in front of you, but your body's always on guard and ready. Imagine like imagine you were trying to cross the street and a car almost hit you. And then you know how like if you're running from a dog, I ran from a dog, chipped my tooth, and yet the adrenaline's going. There's like this perceived threat in front of you, literally. What happens with trauma that goes unprocessed, and I'll continue to talk about this, is that your body can stay in that state, especially when an emotion or feeling comes up that's eerily similar. Hey, Astra, I don't know how to pronounce your name, so I'm not even going to try. So especially when there are things that have happened in the past and it feels the same, the trauma and the way your body responds can be on high alert. And so that's why your system's breaking down. A lot of Black people, especially the socioeconomic status they live in, the life expectancy looks different for people in lower socioeconomic statuses for numerous reasons. But because, when you're always living in survival mode and your body's in survival mode, eventually there's only so much your system can take, right? So how is trauma stored in the body? So the body stores trauma in the brain's emotional and memory centers. And I'm going to keep this so simple so it doesn't feel complicated. My goal is to not complicate this for you, but to really make it so that you can understand it. So it's stored in the brain's emotional and memory centers, such as the amygdala and the hippocampus. This is because the need to protect oneself from perceived threats is stored in these areas, not in the muscles or bones. When a person is presented with a sensory stimulus that triggers a traumatic memory, the body may activate fight, flight, or freeze response. You see this in relationships, right? Especially intimate relationships where a feeling may come up that's similar to something that's happened before. It may not be the thing that's happening in front of you that's creating a lot of the turmoil. It's your system is going into this fight or flight response. Let's say that you struggle with some abandonment issues, and let's say your partner's leaving, going to hang out with friends, and you find yourself struggling with that, right? And it's not that your partner's abandoning you, but the act of leaving is triggering something from when you were left growing up. A lot of these relationships, not just with intimate partners, with families, with friends, people find themselves struggling because what's happening is the memory is coming up that's eerily similar to something that's happened in the past. And so your fight, flight, or freeze response is happening, right? So we talked about how trauma is affecting our body, how it's stored in our body. And I just want to show you this graph of the hippocampus and the amygdala. So the hippocampus and the amygdala are both brain regions that are involved in the learning and memory. They both work together to connect memories to emotions, which can trigger an emotional response. This is important to note because a lot of times when I say the mind only goes at the pace that you tell it to go, I say this a lot. This is what I mean. The mind only has access to the experiences that it's had. And so if there are hard experiences, especially if they haven't gone unprocessed, right? And you're trying to bury it down, which a lot of people do. What's happening is your mind and your hippocampus and your amygdala, they're working together and they're working on trying to protect you in moments where you don't need protection. So you find yourself freezing and not doing the thing you want to do. You find yourself reacting in an irrational way. Sometimes people will say man, they're acting like a child, or wait, they're just mad about that. It's deeper than that. When I work with people and they're talking about a situation and I was like, your response didn't match the situation, but because I know their story, I'm helping them make connections and reminding them that it's deeper than what just happened or what they just saw, what they just seen. Okay, that makes sense. Good. So now let's go into, we talked about how does trauma affect the body, how the body stores trauma, and then the function of the amygdala and hippocampus, right? Understanding those terms doesn't matter, but just knowing that there's pieces of your brain that's holding on to these memories. And if you're not mindful of it, they're controlling the way you're looking at your life and the way you're looking at the lens on your life. Now, trauma can cause a lot of symptoms in your body. And this is so important because a lot of people, especially the GI, I feel like it's number one. The gut is sensitive to trauma and distress. So issues like diarrhea, constipation, nausea, stomach cramps can occur when the body's processing trauma. Right. So the stomach issues, especially if you're seeing a GI specialist, they're not finding anything wrong. Pay attention to when these GI stuff is coming up and how you're finding yourself feeling. Muscle tension and pain, right? And I dealt with a lot of like muscle tension in my back, especially growing up. But it says trauma can be held in specific muscle groups, which can lead to pain and tension. When the emotions are released, the pain and tension can occur anywhere in the body, but it's most common in the core, upper torso, and spine. A lot of people, back issues, unexplained, you never had an injury. A lot of times it's because the trauma, the pain, all of these things are being stored in your body and you don't realize that that's what's happening. And then other symptoms, headaches and migraines. I hear this a lot with my people when things are going on in their life, and I get to know them and I'm like, oh, it sounds like the migraine is starting when this happened or that happens. And then they start making the connection. So I'm sharing this with you because I want you to start making connections and taking more control of your life. Like doctors are great, right? But they're not with you 24/7. And they're only going off of their school training. And so they only know what they know. But you have more of an understanding on when things happen. If you're being more mindful, you can pay attention to when things are starting to come up for you. Chest tightness, rapid heartbeat, chronic tiredness and fatigue, frequent colds and infections, right? Frequent colds and infections are happening because of your immune system is getting weak, right? Your immune system is weak. As we started off this session, trauma can go beyond psychological damage and wear on our physical health, right? And it creates more diseases and short of lifespans because our immune system is so weak just from it being elevated all the time. Like if I had my car on, right, and I'm running it all the time and I'm not replenishing, then I'm going to run out of gas, right? You can't keep living your life the way you're living and not have any effects take place. Now, what happens when trauma happens unprocessed, right? Like, because things are going to happen. Some things are not in our control. And I don't want you to feel you don't have power to change that, right? What's happened to you in the past, we can never undo. We'll never be able to go back and change anything that's happened. And the fact that so many people have allowed what's happened to affect them in the present, it's really sad. But I know that's the case because they don't. What am I going to do? You just keep. I always thought like, okay, like life can't get any better because of everything that's happened. Until I learned like that's not true. That's not the case. So what happens with unprocessed trauma? Unprocessed trauma causes your system to stay on high alert. So you are ready to face the next threat. The need to protect yourself from perceived threats is stored in the emotional memory centers of the brain, which we talked about was the amygdala and the hippocampus. And these areas are activated when a similar situation presents itself and reminds you of past trauma. That could be a boss, that could be a coworker, that could be somebody riding on the bus next to you. A situation happens, it feels like there's a threat happening to you. And then so what happens, instead of you telling your system like I'm okay, what happens is your body starts to respond in ways that may not look reasonable to the person, right? So keep that in mind, that when you're not processing the things that has happened to you, they're showing up in different ways. And this thing of high alert, that's a hard way to go through life, where it feels like you're always having to protect yourself. There are people that have they can't keep friendships, they can't keep a relationship because they've always been in survival mode. So much has happened over the years that their mind is only looking at situations in ways where they're the victim, right? And so it's important to be mindful of that. Now, signs of trauma, like the mental, physical, and behavioral symptoms, right? Because I want you to understand what may be happening to you in real time. So physical symptoms, These can include aches and pains, muscle tensions, headaches, migraines, gastro issues, skin problems, changes in heart rate, mental and emotional, right? Flashbacks, nightmares, memory issues, brain fog, anxiety, depression, disassociation is a big one. A lot of times where you feel like your memory, like I feel like I can't remember stuff, especially people that struggle with childhood memories. A lot of times something happened, and what's happening is your system has like stuffed it down. And dissociation was the way that you were able to get through hard times. But now, as an adult, disassociation doesn't work, right? But these are some of the symptoms, and then behavioral symptoms. Avoidant behavior is big, feelings of shame, addictions, eating disorder, and SI thoughts. The addiction piece, I talk about addictions a lot, and it's really um, one of the things I have a lot of compassion for people around, because what people are trying to do is mitigate their pain, right? Whether it's substance addiction, hoarding, eating addictions, there's just so many different ways that, because we're not taught how to deal with the pain and deal with the things that have happened, we figure it out by using different things. Work can be an addiction. And so once I realize I work more, I don't feel it in the moment, but I'm putting more stress on my body, or I'm not seeing my family the way I want to, right? These addictions are having other ramifications that we're not even making connections to. So when you're thinking about the signs of trauma and the symptoms, pay attention to these areas: physical, mental, and emotional, and some of the behavioral stuff. Now, releasing trauma from your body, right? Because, I think we talked about what happens, how it's stored in our body, right? And my goal is to kind of give you hope. I don't want you to feel that you have to, be at the mercy of your past. And no matter how much work you've done on healing, there are going to be moments where it's going to come up, but you don't have to allow it to control you, right? And I think that's the issue. A lot of people, we haven't been taught how to release, and so what's happening is the pain and stuff we're being controlled by the past, by the memories that come up that we don't know what to do with. So when it comes to releasing the trauma, somatic therapy. So soma, somatic is the body, right? What I do for a living, I'm a therapist. I talk to people. I'm always bringing the body into conversation, but a lot of people are unaware of like somatic body work and therapy and how crucial it is, because we can talk all day, right? I can help you with the logic of understanding and making connections. But at the end of the day, there are all these things that are happening in your body that the talking doesn't change, right? So if you've been in therapy and you feel like, I like my therapist, I'm learning things, but I still feel like my nervous system is out of whack, or I still feel these things, like pay attention and look more into somatic practitioners that kind of specialize in helping you kind of release that trauma from your body. So the somatic therapies can be guided by a therapist, help the body heal through awareness of safety and sensation, right? A lot of people have been divorced from their bodies because it was unsafe. And so you're not connected. You need to get more integrated into your body on a regular basis in order to start like relieving some of your anxieties and depression that you may feel. That's important. So body scans, grounding, visualization, and hugs. Movement practices are important. So these practices can help reestablish a mind-body connection, right? Because a lot of people are, need to get more integrated. It can include stretching, hip squats, wall sits, and shaking your body to music, right? A lot of these practices are not mainstream, and we don't talk about them. But they're important to understand, because a lot of times you may have the logic, but you need to release it from your body. And then therapeutic approaches, cognitive processing, CPT, which is a form of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. And what that does is help you reframe your thoughts. So a lot of times you may have all or nothing thinking, and with CBT, CPT, kind of what I do, I help challenge those thoughts and help you look deeper into what's going on. Eye movement desensitization, EMDR, that's a really good one. Basically, it's a practice where a practitioner that specializes in it brings up things. They have you blink your eye, and somehow there's science behind this. It helps integrate like things, because right now it's like fragmented. A lot of people are like, their thoughts and the things that they've experienced and feels very fragmented. And some of these practices can help bring it together. I want to show you a quick short on YouTube where it's 1 minute, where she, let me share my screen, where she shows us a little movement. And again, YouTube is free. I like to give out free resources um, because access to things are hard. Joanna, I was going to ask you about EMDR. So I believe in EMDR. I did EMDR as a client. I'm not a I don't specialize in it, but I was a client and did EMDR, and I found it to be helpful. And it's a short, it's like 8 sessions. It's not long term. It's a short thing, and The Body Keeps the Score, the book, which is a harder read, but when reading that helped me see like there's more ways than just talk therapy that can help people. And unfortunately, those ways aren't marketed. Insurance doesn't pay. Insurance just pays for psychiatry and therapy. But these other somatic practitioners and people that specialize in this sometimes can be costly. But I thought EMDR was really good. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. I'm trying to, oh yeah, present. Okay, present, share screen. Okay, here it is. All right, so we're going to listen to her talk about this for 1 minute. Make sure this is up. Okay.
Did you know that your body is a storage system for trauma? Every time you felt sad, unsafe, you felt any type of grief or any type of emotional pain, that actually gets stored in your body. And a lot of us are carrying years of packed emotions. Our bodies are kind of like a hard drive, to be honest with you, a hard drive that never gets cleaned. So if you feel stiff, especially in your lower body where your back or your hips are, your body's trying to tell you that it needs to feel free. So one of the ways that you could do this is through movement and breath work. You can take really deep, slow breaths in and out for a couple seconds and move in circular motions, like kind of what you see here, where I'm moving around and trying to loosen up my lower back body. And this helps to release a lot of the emotional baggage that you can be carrying for a very long time. Follow me for more.
All right. So as you can see with that example I gave with the lady healing with tea, I'll put the link in the show notes for people listening. That's just one example of a free resource that you can find online, that where it allows you to do some body work and work on releasing. These are things that aren't taught, right? And so you could be like not having access to therapy or even be in therapy and trying to figure out why this isn't working. And a lot of times that's happening because of the fact that like things are in our body. The last thing I want to say is signs you're healing, right? Because a lot of times we don't realize that we are actually in a healing state, because we don't understand, because we may still be triggered, or we may still find ourselves struggling in some areas. But the reality is that like you're healing, and you're human, so things are going to affect you. And you're going to have power to work on settling your mind, letting your mind know that you're okay. So here are some signs that you're healing. So it says, physically, you may start to feel safer in your body, have less somatic issues like headaches or stomach aches, and be more receptive to touch. You may also understand that some physical symptoms are a result of mental health issues, right? So sometimes some of the physical stuff that people are having, high blood pressure, cholesterol, like some of these things where the doctors are only prescribing medication, a lot of times it has to do with the way you're living your life or the way you're thinking about life, right? Mentally, so some signs you're healing mentally is you may start to feel more confident, more capable, or assertive and have less doubt. You may also be more curious about yourself and others and feel like yourself even when your moods change. Moods are going to change. We're human. That's life. Just because you feel angry today about something doesn't mean you're falling backwards. It just means you're human. Giving yourself grace to feel what you feel. As children, a lot of our parents are survivors. And so they didn't have the capacity to talk about self-care. If you interviewed your grandmother 100 years ago, if you interviewed your great-great-grandmother 100 years ago and asked her what she did, what do you do for self-care? She's gonna be like, she's gonna laugh. What is that? You want something to eat, right? So for years, all we knew is to survive. Maybe prior to a lot of the trauma and things that happen in our generation, they were living life, but people come from a long line of survivors. And so not understanding how trauma is stored in your system, it makes sense. And so sometimes you're the first person in your family system to work on this stuff, and it feels hard. It feels scary. There's so much unknown, but you're doing it, right? So mentally feeling more confident, assertive, emotionally, you may have a greater mental and emotional presence and be able to relate to others. You may also feel more appreciation for life and be able to develop closer bonds with others or grow your support network. It's hard to grow a support network or feel close to people when you're on edge or wondering when the next person is going to backstab you or treat you a certain way. The more power you have over your mind and your thoughts, right? You can't help the thought that comes into your mind, but you can work on not entertaining it. And a lot of times these negative thoughts, these feelings we're triggered, and we're allowing it to control the way that we are thinking and looking at life, and not understanding that I can change the narrative. So if you any takeaways from this, I want you to think about that trauma can be stored in my body. And in fact, for some people, you may be like, you know what? I think that's what's going on with me. So I want you to understand that, because the more educated you are around what's going on with you, the better equipped you are to deal with it. If nobody told me that every time I put my hand over the stove, if I didn't have that connection that if I put my hand over the stove, I'm gonna burn my hand, then and I keep burning my hand trying to figure out what's going on, that sucks. But if I have the knowledge to understand, okay, I don't need to put my hand over the stove, because if I do, the heat comes up, I might burn myself, so I'm not going to do it. And I think when it comes to our mental health, we don't have that knowledge. We don't understand. And so a lot of times the hippocampus and the amygdala, all of those things are being activated. The old memories are coming up, and we are out of control with our behaviors. We're out of control with our physical symptoms, because we don't understand, like, oh, I just need to tell my mind I'm okay. Like, this isn't 2000, this is 2024. We're 24 years later and I'm safe. Like, I got to let my body and my mind know that I'm safe. I got to start to be more active in the dialogue that I'm having with myself, so that I can be more, so that I can feel my power, right? So I don't feel like I'm at the mercy of what this person does or that person does or how they treat me. I can look at what I'm allowing, and I can look at the fact that, like, I can change the way I'm allowing myself to be treated. So I hope this was helpful. I hope this makes sense. If anything I ever say resonates for you, understand that you have the power to make changes. You really do. I promise you do. But you just have to have faith and start to believe in yourself, because when you do that, like, no one can ever take that away. And then you could find this episode will be streaming next week on all audio platforms. I'll keep it up on the video platform. And if there's ever a topic that you want to hear, you can go to CelesteTherapist.com and find the information to do that. Thank you all so much. And I will see you guys next Wednesday, same time, 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.